on boundaries, and I want to get you something to get you thinking. We're going to do a very practical piece tonight on setting boundaries, both internal boundaries and external boundaries. Internal boundaries are the rules we set for ourselves, okay? So I've had many people come to me and say, Tim, I'm never going to use again. I go, great goal, great commitment. How are you going to make that happen? And they go, what? Isn't it enough that I've just decided I'm not going to use again? And I go, no, that's not enough, because there are forces inside of you that until you understand them and learn how to manage them, you will use again if you get triggered in the right way. So take it a bit further. Let's say you get married or you have kids and you say, I want to be the best parent in the world and I want to be the best spouse in the world. And I go, okay, what are you going to have to do in your life to make sure you're the best parent and the best spouse? Because right now you sleep to noon every day. You do a part-time job. You hang around with your buddies at night. Is anything going to change? And they look at me kind of like, what are you talking about? And it's like, you're never going to be the best parent in the world unless you change some very important things. Unless you put in place a structure and a routine that will enable you to become that person. A lot of people, when they come into recovery, they have this whole magic pill type of thinking. And it's basically, take me to a treatment center where they'll give me a magic pill and I'll be magically fixed. And that magic type thinking carries over into other areas. And they go, I will be the best parent in the world. Just give me a magic pill. And I'll magically, automatically become this super parent without having to change a thing. And so what we mean by boundaries is, boundaries are there as rules and guidelines to keep me safe, but also to help me be healthy and help me attain good goals. Because you don't just attain good goals through magic. You attain good goals only through a plan that has priorities, etc. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Another reason why I wanted to start 2020 with this talk is this is the month of everybody going off to fitness clubs and signing up. Do you know that in 3 months, do you know what percentage will still be going to those fitness clubs? 10%. 90% that signed up won't be going there in 3 months. And that's very common in our world, and it's very common in recovery. So you don't just sign up for something and expect to succeed unless you have a plan on how you're going to stick at it. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So before we get into that, what I hope you have seen from this series on boundaries is that boundaries come out of something deep inside of me that says, I want to be better than where I am right now. I don't want to be repeating the same old behaviors, the same old relationship stuff. I want to get healthier. And so at your very core, you develop this commitment, this desire, but you realize it's only going to happen if I have some core beliefs, some core values, some core priorities. So here are some of the ones that I think are great places to start. Or another way to say it is this. You will never set good boundaries for yourself unless you think you're worth it. You will never set good boundaries for yourself unless you respect yourself enough to say, I'm worth putting energy into, I'm worth protecting, I'm worth improving. So out of that self-respect, that deep commitment, which people from complex trauma don't naturally have, you begin to say, I'm going to fight for myself. So here are some of the core boundaries. I will not wait around for someone to dignify me with a relationship. What I mean is this. A lot of people if they're not in a relationship, they go, "Oh, panic, panic, I must not be lovable because nobody seems to want me at the moment." And then they accept any loser that comes along and gives them attention, because that dignifies that they must be lovable. And what you're saying is, no, I don't need somebody else to dignify that I'm lovable. I am lovable. So I can start saying no to a lot of losers, and I'm okay being alone for a while because I'm learning how to be my own friend. And that is a key core thing to start with. So with that, if I get into a relationship, I will not accept less than love, care, trust, and respect, even from myself. So if I'm going to be in a relationship with somebody and they don't respect me, that relationship's done. Because you can't build a relationship without respect. If we're in a relationship and I can't trust them because they've blown it big time, then why am I hanging around? So I am going to do that, but I'm also going to say, start respecting myself. Start trusting myself as I become reliable. I am going to treat myself the way I want others to treat me. Third one, I will not allow somebody else to use me for sex or for anything. So I am not going to be somebody else's pawn on the chessboard that they use to get what they want. I am willing to say I'm better than that. Next one, I am going to commit myself to growing relationships only if 50-50. They respect me as much as I respect them, but they don't see themselves as superior to me and me inferior. Because if we're in a relationship where there's superiority and inferiority, never going to work. So I'm going to demand that we treat each other with the same respect. Absolutely essential. I will not pursue somebody who has rejected me or mistreated me. So I'm not going to go back chasing a guy or a girl that's abused me. I'm done. So I'm going to let go. And I will not make exceptions to these boundaries. So those are very healthy, good core starting points for boundaries. Now let's go into internal boundaries, developing them. So again, we've talked about internal boundaries are to keep me safe and to help me get healthy. There's 5 parts. So the rules that I make for myself. So you realize that in saying I'm going to go to bed at a certain time, that's a boundary. I'm going to get up at a certain time. I'm only going to eat certain kinds of food. I'm not going to let myself eat other kinds of food. Kind of gets messed up at Christmas, but you can start again. But those are boundaries that you do. In recovery, you have stuff around honesty, about getting into relationships, about going to meetings, about having sex. All of those things are all boundaries or rules that you make for yourself. Not out of the blue, but because you understand that's what you need to stay on track and to get healthy. So with that, if you back up and look at it, you start with goals and priorities. So if I want to be a great father, I can't be running around every night of the week taking care of everybody else's kids. I got to say, you know what? In order to be a good father, I have to have a priority of time with my kids. So I'm going to have to cut out things in my life that are taking up time and taking that time away from my kids. So you say my priorities are, and you go through it. So in recovery, you say, I have to stay clean and sober because if I'm not, I'm no good to anybody. So that has to be a priority. But to stay clean and sober, I got to stay connected to people, spiritually fit. I got to go to meetings. I got to have certain routines that I do if I'm ever going to stay clean and sober. So you start to set priorities and then you start to lay out your life. So PESR simply means you have values and morals physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. So you go through your life and say, here's what I believe, here's my priorities in these areas. Then in order to get to that goal, I have to have a routine. So think of yourself as getting ready to go this summer to the Olympics, okay? And you're planning to run the marathon. Now, you don't just sit around and eat potato chips every day and sleep all the time and show up at the starting line and say, magic pill, kick in, I'm going to run a marathon. No, you say, what am I going to have to change? What am I going to have to add to my life? What am I going to have to do? What am I going to have to cut out of my life if I have any chance of winning that marathon? What do I have to do every day, once a week? And it's going to affect your food, your sleep, your exercise, every part of your life. That's what we're talking about. And that's what is necessary in recovery. So what I have seen over the years is everybody, when they come into recovery, highly motivated. And they go to a meeting a day, 2 meetings a day, 3 meetings a day. They go through the steps, get a sponsor, have a morning meditation, do prayers, smudging, all of those things, till a couple months and they're starting to feel a little better. And they go, I'll slack off a little bit. I don't need to work as hard. That's usually their first mistake. Because all of a sudden, they start drifting and returning to some old habits. And before you know it, they're in big trouble. And so what you realize is I'm not just setting rules to be followed for a week or so. I got to stick at this. And so recovery at some point is going to boil down to still doing what you've committed yourself to do on the days you don't feel like it. And if you don't do it on the days you don't feel like it, then your recovery is going to go out the window. So recovery is sticking to these boundaries even when you don't feel like it. So then that's the self-discipline. That's getting yourself out of bed on the mornings you want to just sleep a bit longer. That's going to a meeting when you don't feel like it. And then building into my life things that help me stay motivated. So I tell clients all the time, when you started recovery, it was like there was this huge bonfire. That was your motivation. And it was a hot, burning fire. But the truth is, if you don't feed a fire with more wood, it burns down until it burns out. And so what are you going to do to keep the fire fed and hot? That's part of your internal boundaries that you set for yourself. Okay, now back up a little bit. And I just want you to think about internal boundaries. How do we naturally, if you were in a healthy situation, how would you naturally learn internal boundaries? So I want you to understand or kind of think about what a healthy home would look like. So children come into the world and they don't have healthy boundaries naturally built into them. Children come into the world living out of their limbic brain, which is, I will do something only if I feel like doing it. I will do my homework only if I feel like doing it. And if mom comes along and says, do your homework anyways, mom's a mean mom. And mom's got stupid rules. But what you hope that over time, they'll get old enough to say, thank you, mom, for making me do that when I didn't want to because I learned it was healthy. Okay? So what happens for a parent in a home with a child, if it's a healthy environment, is you are training your children from day one about sleeping, eating, responsibility, getting into fights, hurting their sister, all of those kind of things. And so you're explaining them. But you're setting the boundaries for that child. You're setting external boundaries because they don't do that for themselves. Over time, hopefully, they will take those external boundaries and they will say, I get it. And they will internalize them and make the rules for themselves. That's the plan. Okay? Now, there's a couple pieces within that. Is that number one, you as a parent can't just tell your kids what to do and then not do it yourself. You have to be a role model in healthy boundaries. Secondly, you have to be consistent. It's not going to be good if you enforce boundaries for 2 weeks and then stop. You have to consistently, over many years, enforce a healthy boundary, And then a child will come to a point where they internalize it and they make that a rule for themselves. Don't know if you ever thought about it, but if every single person in Canada had good internal boundaries that were passed down from healthy parents, do you realize that you would not need police in Canada? You would never need to lock your house or your car. You could leave your wallet out on your dash. Nobody would take it because they have good internal boundaries. Now, here's a little thing that helps you measure the health of a society. The more police that you have to enforce the boundaries, the sicker the society is. Because they don't have good internal boundaries. They only will do healthy stuff if it's enforced from an outside force. And so sadly, as a country, we're not in the greatest place that way. But that is what is happening in a home. So the next thing, one way to look at maturity is that you take all of the healthy boundaries that were enforced as external boundaries and you make them your own. And now you don't need somebody else telling you what to do. You do it yourself. You motivate yourself. You create a healthy life and stick to it yourself. That is the sign of maturity. Now, we have a little guide in there called a conscience, and it can be trained to bother us if we don't stick to our boundaries. So if you set a boundary, I'm going to get up every morning, 6 o'clock, going to have some quiet time to do prayer meditation, and you don't do it, something bugs you. That's your conscience saying you're slipping, you're sliding into unhealthy behavior, get back on track. One of the things that you probably heard the term for is when somebody is institutionalized. So if we get a client here, or you look at any residential program in Winnipeg, they do great in a residential program because somebody tells them when to go to bed, when to get up, what to do for every minute of the day, and somebody is on their case if they get lazy or they want to take a break. So they get external rules and external motivation. The minute they graduate, they relapse because they didn't internalize any of it, and they don't make their own routine, and they don't stick to the plans that they have. That is a person that can't survive unless they're in an institution where others make the rules and enforce the rules. That is an institutionalized person. And they can do great there, but until they learn to internalize it, they are in big trouble. So let me take it one step further. So complex trauma, we've seen not good boundaries. Inconsistent, sometimes too rigid, too strictly enforced, sometimes never there. You just do whatever you wanted. And so people coming out of complex trauma don't naturally have good boundaries. And then you go into addiction. Who cares about boundaries? All you care about is your next high. You don't want a job. You just want to hustle and get your money and figure out how to get all of that stuff. So boundaries and self-discipline, they aren't part of what you're thinking about. But I hope what you're seeing is if you're going to make it in recovery, that has to change. And internal boundaries have to begin to happen inside of you, or you just won't make it. So let me take you to, okay, how do we do this? So I get clients all the time to think through, what do I need to do to be sober and clean? What do I need to have in my life on a weekly basis, on a daily basis? That's not just activities, that's people, connection type of things. What do I need to do to keep myself healthy, physically, emotionally, spiritually? Build that into my life. So you think it through. Sometimes I get clients to get a day timer, and I get them to map it out on their day timer. Now, what I want you to understand is this. It is really easy to stick to a recovery program when you're in a recovery treatment center, because all of your time is devoted to that. The problem happens when you leave that and you go into one of two or both situations. The first is you get a job. And all of a sudden you got 8 hours of your day tied up. And now where are you going to fit in your recovery? Okay? Or you have children. And now you've got children nipping at your heels all the time. And you go, where do I get a moment to think? And so that's when recovery and sticking to a recovery plan gets difficult. And so what I want clients to do is to be realistic. You can have a Superman recovery plan in a treatment center, and you can follow it. Don't get down on yourself if you can't do every single detail of that plan because you have your kids under feet all the time now. But figure out how to still have enough recovery in your daily activities to keep you clean and yet still meet the needs of your children. So I hope you realize this is a challenging thing to figure out. This is not something that is super easy, black and white, neat and tidy. It is very complex, and it takes some trial and error to eventually figure out what will work for you. Okay. Part of a good recovery plan becomes accepting the responsibilities you have in your life and not procrastinating those things. So if your kitchen, the dishes are piled high, and you go, I really got to get those dishes done, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you look out, you know what? The toilet reeks, it's dirty, I got to clean, I'll do that tomorrow. And you keep procrastinating. Before you know it, you're going to stress yourself out to the point where you give up or relapse. So finding out what are my responsibilities, how do I do that as part of this plan so that I get it done, I feel good about myself, and part of that is not falling into procrastination. So let me give you some just practical tips on doing your responsibilities. So I'm going to just say, assume that you have an apartment, you have a house, wherever you're living, that you're responsible for. What I have learned in my own life is I need to be aware of the times in the day and the times in the week when I am less motivated than other times. So you probably have a time of the day when it's your peak motivation time. Mine's first thing in the morning. When I get home, so if I have a job that I would normally do in the morning and I wake up and I go, you know what? I'm going to do it after I get home tonight from work. You want to know what the chances of me doing that job tonight when I get home from work? About 0. Because I get home from work, oh, I'm just too tired. So you have to figure out what are the times when I have peak motivation, because that's when I need to plan some of these responsibilities, especially the ones I don't enjoy. Okay? Second thing, I need to know what are the things that help me remain motivated. So if you're in recovery, you've heard of this, play the tape to the end. So if you are saying, oh, I don't feel like doing something, I'm feeling lazy today, I'm going to procrastinate, play that tape out to the end. What we saw a couple weeks ago is when you are most prone to change your boundaries or not follow them, is when you go back into your limbic brain, your child brain, which says, I'm going to make decisions based on how I'm feeling at this moment in time. And so what you have to do is, if you sense your limbic brain is wanting to take over, is to say, limbic brain, shut up, cortex, what's the wise thing to do here? And let it trump your limbic brain. So play the tape to the end. That's a cortex job when your limbic brain is wanting to not do something. Secondly, it helps us to be accountable. So if you have a job that you know you need to do, but you don't tell anybody about it, it's easier not to do it than if you tell a couple close friends, I got to do this job, check with me on Saturday to make sure I've done it. Then you get more motivated. So accountability can help. But we don't just need a negative, hard environment like you got to do. We need encouragement along the way. We need to hear that people care about us. that they're noticing that we're changing. When we get that kind of encouragement, we get this boost of energy that says, I want to keep doing this. This is paying off. And then we need to connect with another human being at a deeper level and talk about how we're really doing. Because in most of our social interactions in our culture today, how are you doing? Fine. Smile on your face. And that's as deep as the conversation goes. And we can disconnect quite easily from how we're really doing. So have somebody that you can talk at that honest, deep, authentic level. Next, develop a routine that works for you. I am an early morning person. I like to get up around 5 and I do my stuff and I have a routine, and my kids laugh at me because they can predict what I'm going to be doing at any point in my day because I do it every day. But you want to know what I found about a routine? I've done it long enough now that it's a habit. And I get up some mornings and I don't feel like getting up, but you know what? I've done it every morning for the last 20 years. So I just fall out of bed and get going because it's a habit now. And so as you strengthen a routine into a habit, it helps you actually stick to it on days you don't feel as motivated. Next one, set small, achievable, realistic goals. So what I get from a lot of parents is they go, oh, I can think of 50 things I want to change with my kids. So I'm going to enforce 50 new boundaries with my kids this week. And I go, you know what? Back off a little bit. Let's do one new boundary a week and see how that goes. And if they're starting to catch on to that, then we'll do another boundary. So make it realistic. Next one, I find, and many have found, that having a clear conscience, living out of my beliefs and my values, feeling that spiritual connection helps me stick to the boundaries I set for myself. Another thing, if you were to ask me to teach all day, by the end of the day, I would be physically tired, but I would be pumped. I would feel energy because I am working in the area of my passion, the area that I'm best suited for. But if you were to ask me to do accounting books all day, by noon I'd be sleeping with my head on the desk, bored, frustrated, drained, because I'm not wired for that. So find out what you're good at. And as you do the things you're good at, you will find it releases energy in you and motivates you to keep going. Don't be afraid to celebrate accomplishments. Some of you might have been raised in a family where you never were complimented or patted on the back because they didn't want to give you a big head. And they didn't want you to become proud. But we need to be able to celebrate accomplishments and say, I am growing. I am making a difference. And that helps motivate us. Okay, competition. Give you 2 examples. Some people have started exercise programs and they go all by themselves to the gym and they work out. And after 2 weeks, they lose their motivation. But if they went with a buddy every time, then they stay motivated because they motivate each other. In the days you're feeling a little down, the other person's pumped. They're saying, come on, we're going to go to the gym. And they drag you out and you're glad you went. So sometimes in difficult types of things, having some competition. Now, my wife found this very helpful when it came to sticking to eating plans. And so she would do great by herself for a while. But if her sister said, I'm going to stick at this plan longer than you, well, the fight's on. And she's not going to let her sister beat her. And so that competition kept her motivated. Okay? Rewards. We know with children, if you even give them a smiley face or a gold star, then they want to keep doing that because they got validated for that. So we need to be able to validate ourselves, even reward ourselves for jobs well done. That helps us want to keep doing it. There are times when you might want to relapse, but what has kept you sticking to recovery is you've got 3 children that you're responsible for. And that sense of responsibility has kept you on track. Now, that by itself won't keep you on track forever. You need other things to keep you motivated. A sense of responsibility is important, but not enough all by itself. And then another one that people find is starting to genuinely learn how to love. So in addiction, complex trauma, survival mode, life becomes all about you. You're the center of your universe. You don't love people, you use people. And that becomes a very dead, boring, painful world. But if you've never learned how to genuinely love people, you don't know the energy that that can give, the motivation that that can give. Now, it can exhaust you, but something changes deep inside of you. So those are some practical tips. Next thing I want to just mention, early recovery, be very, very careful about slipping into old habits. And I just put up 3 that I have seen are the most common ones that I watch people slipping into. And I'm not putting up there getting into a relationship. That's another one. But these are old habits. So number 1, starting to stay up later and later and later. And before you know it, you're up all night, sleeping all day. And it starts to feel like you're using world again, or going back into your distractions, video games, being on your phone all day. Those kind of things can be very dangerous habits, or spending too much time watching TV and letting responsibilities slide. Those are so easy to slip back into, but they can be so dangerous for somebody in early recovery. Another thing I find, do the least like responsibilities when I have the most energy. So if I have a bunch of things I don't like doing, and I do have those, I go, Saturday morning, that's my time to do all of that stuff. Get it done, and it's out of my way. And so I tackle those things first thing in the morning, and I get them done, and I don't have them hanging over me. So find out when is best for you to do those least like. Next one. Many from complex trauma are perfectionists. So when they think of boundaries, they think they got to do it perfectly. And what I say is, know the difference between doing a job well and doing it perfectly. Because what you're really aiming for is doing it well, and it might not be quite up totally to your standards, but hopefully you can realize well is really what I need to aim at. And then know the difference between jobs that need to be done today and those that can wait. Now, if you're a good addict, you can find a reason why every job can wait. So you got to be very careful about self-delusion and distortion at this point. But there will be some days that things come up that demand your attention, and some jobs will have to be postponed to another day. Know kind of how to sort that out. So that's internal boundaries. And let me just say again, this is an ongoing learning journey. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still learning things about my internal boundaries, how to help myself do better in these areas. So don't expect yourself to get it perfectly in a month. This is an ongoing thing. You got to persist. Okay, I want to switch to external boundaries, and that's stuff with people, okay? So I want to do 2 things very quickly about setting boundaries with people. One of the exercises I mentioned in this beginning of this series, and I'll just mention again, we have our clients do a relationship map. So you put yourself in the center, And then you put the people closest to you, either geographically as far as friends or biological family that you're obligated to spend time with or have a relationship with. And then you go out to those that are more distant friends till you get acquaintances, okay? So you map that out. And then I get clients to focus on the closest relationships in their life, okay? So rank those relationships on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as how healthy it is. So let's say you take the relationship with one of your children, and you look at that relationship and say, I'd have to give that about a 5. There's a lot of stuff happening there right now that's not good. Okay? So what would it take to move that relationship from a 5 to a 6? That is a boundary change. So what boundaries would I have to set up to improve this relationship? So I go into what would I like to be different? So what would I like to see in our relationship? Okay? Is there anything I need to do differently about how I respond to that child, about how I talk to them, about time I spend with them? That's going to be part of that. If I set a boundary with that child that's different, they may not like it. And they may fight that and try to get me to go back to the way it used to be. Those are hooks. So am I ready for that? How am I going to respond if they resist? How am I going to enforce this? So you're thinking through, how do I improve the most important relationships in my life to make them better? What do I need to change? What should change in how we relate? What I allow them to do with me? And then, okay, let's say I'm going to set a boundary and the child does not want to do it, or whoever you have in mind. What am I going to do when they don't do the boundary? What are the consequences going to be? So what I say to clients is this: a boundary is no good if there's not consequences for not following it. You're just blowing a lot of hot air. So don't set a boundary unless you're prepared to enforce consequences. Absolutely essential. Because if you set a boundary and don't enforce it, you're training your children or whoever that your boundaries don't mean anything, that you don't really enforce it. So those are just some things that you can do in thinking through boundaries with other people. Next, the final thing, 10 things to set healthy boundaries. This is borrowed from others, so it's not anything new, but it's out there in a lot of programs, so I'll quickly go through it. If you set a boundary with somebody, clearly identify what it is. Don't just say, stop texting me so much, because they want to know, what does so much mean? Does that mean once an hour, once a day, once a week? So be clear, okay? Understand first why you need the boundary. So if they're texting you and blowing up your phone constantly, and they're never following your advice, they're just wearing you out, you need a boundary to protect yourself from getting burned out. So understand why you're doing it. Just be straightforward. Don't hem and haw and beat around the bush and kind of come at it by hints and all kinds of things. Just say it. Don't have to give an apology or a long explanation. Just explain, this is what I need, and clearly lay it out. Use a calm and polite tone. Now, I got to add one piece to that. Use calm, polite when you first give the boundary. Be prepared. They might get mad at you. And they might lash out at you, and be ready to still be calm and polite. Don't get angry and lash out yourself. When you first meet people, start with tighter boundaries, and that means you're going to be out at arm's length, and then I'm going to gradually let you in. If I find out that you're fairly healthy, don't let them in too quickly and then have to say, how do I get rid of this person? Okay? Don't make it a personal thing. And if somebody sets a boundary with you, don't take it all personally. That's important. If you set a boundary that you know you're going to have trouble doing, have a support system to help you with that, to help you stick to it, and trust your gut, trust your intuition. If you are with a person and you're getting red flags and danger signs, listen to it. Don't just start inviting them out for coffee and being their best buddy and then regretting it. Pay attention to your gut. So that's boundaries. Now, what I've learned, the first time I taught boundaries, I talked for 30 minutes and I ran out of things to say. Now I do a whole week on boundaries and I could do 2 weeks. This is a massive topic. My hope is that you have seen it is an absolutely essential, important topic if I'm ever going to stay clean and if I'm ever going to get healthy and if I'm going to get healthier relationships. And I hope you've got some healthy tools. I'm going to talk about the part of the Bible that was really behind the start of finding freedom. But before I get into that, I want to do 2 verses in the Bible from Galatians 6 that really are about boundaries. So it says this: dear friends, if another believer, so somebody that you are involved with in recovery, in church, etc., if they're overcome by some sin so they fail in a way that they just can't get out of it, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. So it's saying we need each other. We need to be there when we fall or when others fall to help them get back up and get on the right path. But then it says this: but be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. And that is so critical. So sometimes when people come to me and they want to start working at React or finding freedom, if they haven't been around that environment very much or they're new in recovery, what I say is this: when you're working with people new in recovery, you're working with people who are talking about their addiction all the time. They're not only talking about their addiction, it then goes into all their bad relationships and their sex addiction and all of their relationship problems. And you're being inundated every day with that. And guess what you take home in your head? All of that. And if you're not in a strong, healthy place yourself, what does all of that stuff, if you're facing it every day, it starts to plant the thought in your head, oh, I wonder what that would be like. And many people, out of their desire to help others, have jumped in before they were strong enough, and it's taken them out too. And so Paul is saying, be very careful when you are helping people that you're aware of how vulnerable you are. Because if you've got a lot of vulnerabilities right now, you're not fit to help people. That's not saying anything bad about you. It's just saying you got to work on yourself longer. Because to be around that 24/7, it does affect how you think, and it can play in your head if you're not strong enough. So that's the first one. Now, James 5. Now, I want to read this. This is one of those parts of the Bible that, in my mind, gets avoided by everybody because a lot of it is not understood. And often churches will try to follow this, but it's kind of weird at times for people. So I just want to read it to you. It says this: are any of you sick? You should call for the elders of the church to come and pray over you, anointing you with oil in the name of the Lord. So sometimes if you've been to some churches, they will have people who are sick come forward and they will pour oil on them and pray. And they think they're following this, okay? And it says, such a prayer offered in faith will heal the sick and the Lord will make you well. And if you've committed any sin, you will be forgiven. confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Now, I don't want to enter into any long debates with people. I just want to kind of give you this. What I have seen over the years is that I can take you to people who have done this when they were sick. And they've brought the elders in, they poured oil, and they prayed, and they confessed their sins. And they never got better. And they're going, but that part of the Bible says I'm going to get healed. And so that got me thinking, a number of years ago, are we misunderstanding this? Because I can see way too many examples of people who followed this to a letter and nothing's changed. And what I began to see is for some people, they almost saw this kind of like a superstition, a magic thing. There's some magic in the oil and the prayer, so do it and you'll get magically healed. And that's how they began to take it. So let me share with you what I have found, and hopefully you'll begin to understand why it is I do what I do and why we have Friday nights and React. So if you take that word sick, it can mean physically sick, but that's not the main meaning. The main meaning, so the New Testament was written in the Greek language. It referred to somebody who was weak and feeble, and it could be emotionally, it could be spiritually, or physically. So what it was somebody, if it's emotional, spiritual, somebody that's just defeated, discouraged, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling like a failure, they're feeling they just can't get this, and they're feeling like giving up. That's what the word sick meant. So somebody that's just feeling exhausted emotionally, spiritually, and they're starting to think it's not worth it, let's call it a day. Okay? The passage, though, talks about two types of sickness. So the first one is what I would call soul weariness. And that's where what I just described. You're exhausted, you're worn out, you're defeated, discouraged. But it also says you can be sick due to being unhealthy. You ever realize that when you live outside of healthy boundaries, you overeat, you cheat on your partner, you lie, you steal, pretty soon life gets very draining. It wears you out living out there. It might seem fun for a little while, but it makes you sick and it exhausts you. And so he's saying there's two types of weariness. One where you're just exhausted, worn out, discouraged. Another where you've brought it on yourself by living an unhealthy life. And what is addiction? Bottom line is a person who's soul weary because of the choices they've made to live unhealthy. And it has worn them out and brought them to a bottom. So it says to anybody that is soul weary, what are you supposed to do? It says call for the elders and they will anoint you and pray. Elders simply means a person who's spiritually mature and strong. A lot of people go to elders in a church, and for some of you, those are bad people. Elders can be those very black and white, judgmental, negative, authoritative people, and you want nothing to do with it. He's not talking about that here. He's talking about go to somebody who's spiritually strong. Go to somebody who's lived a life consistently of healthy, that isn't going to judge you, that can love you unconditionally, that has a consistent relationship with God and healthy relationships within their own family. Go to people like that, okay? Then it says, have them anoint you with oil. Before I get there, I just think it's interesting. It says, go and get somebody else to pray for you. Have you ever been so worn out and run down and discouraged you can't even pray yourself? You just can't get the energy, or you can try. It's like your prayers bounce off the ceiling. There's just nothing there. And what he is saying is we can get to points in our life where we're so down we can't even pray. Those times we need others to pray for us. And what I want you to understand is this. That happens in everybody's life. So don't if you have that happening to you, don't beat yourself up. Don't go to a church where they're going to beat you up for that, because that's part of the journey. Have people in your life that you can go to who care enough and won't judge you and will pray for you. Okay, so it says, have them anoint. Now, this is the key word. There are two words in the Greek language for anoint. So the one is pour oil on somebody, and Israel would do that when they anointed a king. They would pour oil on them. That's not the word used here, but that's the way it gets used in a lot of churches in our country. There's a second word, and it's the one that's used here, and it meant to like a masseuse that pours oil on you and massages you with that oil. Now, I'm not saying go to a masseuse and get them to massage you with oil. That had a metaphorical meaning, and this is where it got really exciting for me. So what happens when you have a sore muscle and you're exhausted and your body's worn out? You need somebody who knows what they're doing to take oil and find the sore spot and work it out. Okay? That's the idea. So what he is saying here, and this is the metaphor, when you're soul weary, go to somebody with expertise who can find the sore spot and work it out. And they can help your soul to get healthy again. And what it meant was this: they're able to do and help you know what you need to do to get back on your feet. Now, here's where I have problems with a lot of churches. If you went to the elders of many churches and you're soul weary and you're discouraged and feeling like giving up, they would give you one of 4 tools. They'd say, read your Bible more, pray more, go to church more, and have faith. And those are the 4 tools that most churches hand out. And sadly, those are the only tools some churches hand out. You know what this verse is saying? Go to somebody who has the expertise to know practical terms how to help you. And they might go and spend time with you and say, you know what? You need a break from your kids. You're a single parent. You're exhausting yourself. Let's see if we can get you a babysitter one night a week so you can have a night off. That's massaging a weary soul. Isn't that an amazing thing? Is you're figuring out what does this person need to help them get out of where they're at to a healthier place. So you might say, you know what? You need to go to React and get some help for that childhood trauma. You need a program. You need counseling. Or you might say, you know what? You need some help to get some bills paid. And so we're going to try and work with you to help you get some money happening. But we're going to practically meet the needs that you're struggling with right now. And so that's what James 5 is saying. There's no magic here. There's no just pray it away or read your Bible more. And all those things are important. I'm not minimizing that. But what James 5 is saying, you need more than that when you're discouraged and worn out. You need people who can give practical help to help you onto your feet. And then he adds this parallel. It goes on and it talks about Elijah. And it says, the earnest prayer of a righteous man has great power and produces wonderful results. So if you were to read the passage, he talks about prayer 5 times. It's repeated, repeated, repeated. It says Elijah was a human, just like we are. He wasn't any super saint. Yet when he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall on Israel, none fell for 3.5 years. Then when he prayed again, the sky sent down rain and the earth began to yield its crops. A couple key things that you have to understand. What Elijah did was take Deuteronomy 28, which was God's marriage contract with Israel. And God said to Israel, if you cheat on me, if you go after other lovers, if you don't follow me anymore, here's the bad consequences that are going to start to happen. And right up at the front was, I'm going to send people to warn you, but if you ignore them, then I'm going to send a drought. Okay? So what does Elijah do? He's in touch with the people that he's pastoring, and he says they've drifted far from God. So God said he would not send rain. I'm going to pray and say, God, don't send rain. So God is doing what he promised, but I'm just praying it to be part of what God has already committed himself to. So he wasn't just walking in out of the blue and saying, I'm going to pray that God's not going to send rain and it won't happen no matter where I go in the world. No, it was based on what God had already laid out, okay? But then there's a second thing. There's this metaphor here. So what he is saying is, sometimes when you step outside of God's plan, you get soul weary from your bad choices, but you become like a desert. There ain't no rain happening inside of you. You're drying up. There's nothing growing. There's no fruit. It's a dry desert because of your own choices. So what happened with Elijah? After 3.5 years, they were getting to a place where they were saying, we're sick of our choices. We have to change. And that's a bottom where I can't keep living like this. It's too painful. This drought has resulted in people starting to die and losing businesses. What's wrong? We got to own our stuff, okay? So Elijah gathered all of them together, and he says, are you finally ready to reconnect with God? Are you finally ready to surrender to him again? And they said, yes, we are. And he said, okay, God, you heard what they promised. Now you said you'd send rain, so send rain. And guess what? God sent rain. So the point was this. Elijah didn't make any magic happen. He was just responding to where his people were at. And when they were away from God, he says, let them experience a hard life so they won't stay there too long. So they'll wake up and say, these bad choices aren't worth it. And then when they get to that point and they want to get right with you, hear them and send the rain again. And that's what James is saying. When people get to a place in their life and they go, I've screwed up. I'm getting the consequences now. I got a desert in my soul. I'm exhausted from this life. I got to change. I got to get connected spiritually. If you do that, you're going to need some help to get steered and helped with that and people supporting you. But then God's going to send rain on your soul. And it's going to start to grow again and you're going to have fruit. So what James is saying is this. All of us are going to have soul weariness at times. Sometimes bring it on ourselves. Sometimes just we wear ourselves out. We need help. And so he says, confess to each other. And what he is saying is, create a family where you begin to share honestly what's really going on inside of you. And you don't just come to church or wherever and say, nice weather it is today, and you watch the Jets over the holidays, blah, blah, blah. You start to develop relationships where you say, here's how I'm doing. And you're honest about it. And you're supporting each other. You're praying for each other. And if it gets too hard, you go to the people with the expertise and say, please help me figure out what I need to do to get back on track because I'm feeling like giving up. And you go to those people who can help you in practical terms know how to change your life, to get it a healthier place so the rain can come again. You want to know what I do? I massage weary souls every day. People come to me exhausted from their choices, from their life, but they don't know how to get back on their feet. They don't know how to fix that exhausted, weary soul. And I believe God's entrusted to me the great privilege that Elijah had to say, let me come beside you and rub oil into that soul in practical ways and in spiritual ways so that you can have life again in the core of your being. So that's what Finding Freedom is about. James 5, massaging weary souls. So I hope that helps you, hope that encourages you, and helps you realize that we have to be there to help